Welcome to Life by Design for Chiropractors, episode 97.
Welcome to Life by Design, the podcast for chiropractors. Here's your host, Dr. Jamie Richards.
Welcome to Life by Design for Chiropractors. I'm your host, Dr. Jamie Richards, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Dr. Chug, and we share our failures over the last 12 months, not just over our lifetime, because there is plenty of those, but really what's still putting salt in the wound. What failures have we had over the last 12 months that we can share with you and share some of the lessons? And I know you're going to get a ton of value added today because I've got a ton of value added today just going back and listening to today's episode. And we've talked about it before, but pay attention. You're going to see some great, very interesting stuff coming down the pipe. We've been recording a lot of what we do before the show and realizing there's some great, valuable content there and some innovative ideas that we want to start sharing with you. So we've got a way that we can do that coming up soon. So enjoy today's episode of Life by Design for Chiropractors, the voice of reason in chiropractic. Horatio, welcome to Life by Design for Chiropractors.
I'm super happy to be here. I love doing this. This is awesome.
Yeah, today we're talking about practice fails, epic fails in practice, but more specifically over the last 12 months. I mean, we both have lots of epic practice fails over the course of our practice careers. So, and the reason I wanted to talk about the ones that are specifically the last 12 months is because, you know, the ones that happened, say, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, they've happened. And for the most part, we're over them. You know what I mean? Like, we're past it. It's like, yeah, it failed. And we laugh. We have this little chuckle. But by talking about the things where we failed in the last 12 months, I think there's still salt in the wound, you know, and you're going to be able to sense the emotion and the pain. And we're going to be able to share more benefit to you, the listener, and give you more actionable material because it's more real for us right now.
Sorry, just grabbing a drink of water. Yes, I totally agree. I'm like Jamie would be talking a while. I got plenty of time to get a drink of water.
Hilarious.
Yeah, man. You know, and yeah, it's fun. I can't wait to talk about it. I'm sure because you kind of put me on the spot just a second ago. I'm sure as I listened to some of yours, more of mine, because there's been lots of failures in the past 12 months that you know, I'm excited to chat about them.
All right. Well, I'll jump in. Sure. First one for me is getting too far away from the business. And so what I mean by that, quick context for backstory, developing multiple pieces here at the Life by Design Center, opening up Charlie's Cafe, having associates. You know, I had this vision of scaling, and scaling meant I needed time to do other things, open Charlie's, do marketing. And so, you know, felt like I had the right pieces in place. And to some degree I did, and just didn't have all the right pieces in place. And so I stepped further away from the business, put other people in charge, gave them responsibilities. And, you know, it probably wasn't really the fact that it was too much for them. It was the fact that I was too far away. And again, having experience in when things are on track and off track and expecting other people to have that same level of experience was a mistake. And so the further I got away from it, the less I knew what was going on, even though I'd look at statistics and so on, but I didn't have my finger on the pulse of the business. And for our listeners, you know, you may not have multiple businesses and that's not applicable, but it is in terms of you're not paying attention. You know, maybe you're drifting off into real estate or you're doing other projects and you just kind of show up and you go home and you show up and you go home. And, you know, the further you get away from the business, I find that's where things start to crumble. And, you know, it can decay with the conversation and communication with your staff. You don't have the same pulse on, you know, what your retention is like or what your practice members are thinking or saying. And so, you know, getting too far away from the business was actually a huge mistake and it had set me back, even though the trade-off here was I was able to fast forward and propel, you know, some of the other projects, get Charlie's open and go through some other pieces that way. So, you know, there was obviously some benefit and gain, but I think the more important piece is knowing that, you know, I've got to be able to grow and scale, but I need to know where that edge is and where the property ends, how far away from the business I can get before I start losing that business.
Yeah. Oh man, I got lots of questions and I have lots of thoughts because it kind of leverages, I mean, from the opposite end of the spectrum, I think one of the ones that I've less in the last 12 months, but still when it happens, I'm like, yeah, I thought I was over this, you know, is is you catch yourself coasting, right? So that would be one of mine. And I think it's the same thing. It's very, very similar to what you just said, but in a different direction, right? So coasting, you're still taking your foot off the gas pedal. You just took your foot off the gas pedal to do other things, right? To grow other aspects, where I took my foot off the gas pedal because it was like, vacation time or whatever it is. Right. So, it's interesting. I wonder why. I wonder why that happened.
Why do you think it happened? In your case, why don't you just give us the insight?
Well, I know what happened before. Before it was, things are good, so you can relax a little bit. You don't have to have this anxiety. Right. But now it was just interesting in the sense that I think I just stopped paying attention. That's never happened before, right? We went to Florida, and it was just and I remember thinking 5-6 days, I'm like, oh my God, I hadn't even thought of my business for the last 5-6 days. I'm like, and before it was just this obsession with it, all the time, 24/7. And I don't think either is healthy. But I think, going back to values and yourself, I think, thinking of your business and your life in terms of how can I make this happy and how can I, create something that's valuable in the community. I think that's the right way to think about it.
Yeah. Well, I wonder too, like you said, it's a double-edged sword here, because it's nice to be content, right? Yeah. It's nice to actually, especially considering, where we've come from in the past, but it's nice to be content. And, again, for people who are listening, you hit that point, you're like, this is nice. It's nice not to have to stress out all the time. It's nice to have money in the bank account. It's nice to know that there's patients showing up on Monday. But I always think of it, and this has been my experience, like the wave. And the goal here is to always ride the wave, right? I just want to ride the wave for the rest of my life. But to ride the wave, I've got to keep that momentum going so the wave is still high. Now, the wave might go up and down a little bit, but if I let the wave totally crash, then I've got to wait for the next wave, and I've got to build that momentum again. And I think that's where you've got to find that sweet spot where you're able to surf the wave and everything's working because you're putting enough energy into things in the right places, and you can still allocate time and energy into other things you love that are outside your business. But when you let things totally crash, then you're left with having to reinvent things again, and not just reinvent, but re-energize. And of course, creating momentum takes so much more work. And that's where, if you're like me, you're just kicking yourself. What was I doing? My goodness, I could have did 10% of the work and kept the wave going. And now I'd let it crash. And now I've got to do 90% of the work that I wouldn't have had to have done had I just kept the momentum moving forward.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
So give me another one, Cracio. What is another mistake you made over the last 12 months?
So again, coming from this, I think a lot of it just comes from this old school mindset. And here's the thing with this stuff, man. These things cut deep. If you're working on becoming, a better human or a better version of yourself, or however you want to phrase it, if you're working on you start to realize that some of these ideas, they've had their roots planted in your mind and in your whole conscious for a long time. So it can take a lot of time to change them. So the other one, and it's the same idea over and over again. This is going to sound like, when you have that interview, well, I'm a workaholic and yada, 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 that nonsense. It was playing defense, right? And not playing enough offense. So really getting into Google in the last little bit. And, when I went back and I always knew this, I knew from day one that we started doing advertising with Google, it was a big winner. But I was, instead of going all in and, like we talked about, putting the money up and just going for it, because I know that it's going to bring you big results. You kind of sit back and you're like, wow, it could go wrong. And, I might get the AdWords right. And what if the ad's not right? And now when I'm diving into it and moving forward, I'm like, what the hell was I waiting for?
Well, knowing you, that's your nature, right? Is be conservative, play it safe. So you've done a good job at overcoming that in many, many ways since I've got to know you. Yeah, you're much better. I mean, I'm sure still the conversation goes on in your head, and sometimes you've got to bash yourself in the noggin to go ahead and click the button. But
it's interesting. It's interesting, it's interesting because, and I'm glad we're doing this episode because you're right. These ideas are fresh, right? So now it's okay. So so now it's coming time to put Vetti into childcare, right? And then because he's December birthday,
right.
Now next September he's going to be going to Montessori, and you're like, shit, like that's expensive. It's worth it. But it's expensive, and you're doing the math, and you're like, oh, and you have these ideas you want to execute on these marketing strategies. So it's never like, it's funny how it happens. It's never this massive thing where you just shut everything down. It's like, death by 1,000 cuts.
Right.
This starts to concern you, and then this starts to concern you, and that spirals together into having this start to concern you. And before you know it, you're stuck in these old patterns and these old habits, and you're not progressing, and you're like, this really sucks, and then you snap yourself out of it.
Sure. Well, yeah, you just do the math, right, Krisha? 4 more visits a week and Vetti's taken care of.
Sure. Like, right?
Yes. So you break it down. You're like, oh, well, I can see 4 more patients a week. That's, visits a week. That's not a big deal.
But here's the thing. Even if that doesn't happen, I'll find a way to make it happen.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. Like it's, like I heard something the other day, and honestly, like I was pissed. I punched the steering wheel. I was so pissed. I was listening to FM 96, and more people, like this is just, I was pissed because this hurts my soul. Less people took vacations this summer because they thought that gas was more expensive. Here's the kicker. Here's the kicker. Gas prices this year are actually cheaper than last year's gas prices. Yeah. But what upset me is that there's things that people wanted to do in their life,
of course,
and they didn't do them because of something. And that's just, to me, that to me is not okay, because you're going to die one day.
Yes. Well, like, bless my dad, but he'll call me when gas is, 3 cents cheaper somewhere that I have to drive to go get the gas that's 3 cents cheaper and take the 2 hours to go get the gas that's 3 cents cheaper. And, thanks, Dad. I'll just get the other gas.
But isn't that just that's the idea, that's holding people back. It's this idea that, well, I can't do something because of this, versus, well, this is happening. How am I still going to be able to do the things
that's
that I want to do?
Exactly it. Yeah. So leads me to the next one here, Krisha, for me is underestimating my capacity. And so, probably on the surface, knowing us, you'd probably say, well, no, there's no way, you've got great capacity. But I think, it's important to know that I still second guess myself. There's still lots of things that go on in my life where I think, I don't know, could I do that? And, when we went back to my values and understanding that freedom was a big value for me, I took a long time. This goes back to kind of the decision-making speed, but it took a long time for me to make a decision to work less. And not just work less, but see the same number of patients and visits in less time. I had all the different excuses. Oh, these, it's going to be too much. I won't be able to do it. The service is going to go down. My numbers will drop. We won't have the revenue that I need to, run the practice of my life. And eventually I got around to the point where I did it. And within, a 4-week period, we'd compressed our practice down to 2 full, 100 visit a day days. And the team manages them great. Everything runs great. The practice is doing great. And, I just think, how many other times, am I underestimating what I'm able to do? And then holding back on making a decision, not because I don't know, what to do, or I don't have an idea, but simply just because I don't think I'm going to be able to do it.
Yeah. I think that's human nature. I don't think, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think what would be wrong with that is just based on, what we just talked about. These are things that you wanted to have happen, and you were worried that you had legitimate, because I know you well enough now. I know that the concerns that you're worried about, these aren't like, thought up, made up things. These are logical concerns that you have brainstormed how you're going to handle them if they happen. So, I mean, I don't know. I think what would have been worse, like I said, is if you hadn't pulled the trigger because you were concerned.
Sure. Well, and I guess that's my point, is I wish I would have pulled it even faster.
Right.
And again, shorten that decision-making cycle where I could decide on something and then either win or lose, and then move on and do the same thing again and repeat that cycle as many times as possible. Now,
yeah, I think that's something that plagues everybody.
Sure. Yeah, no, very true. What about you, Krisha? Yeah. What's another one on your list?
Something really practical that I'm not really even sure if it was a mistake, but I had those postcards made up. And I sent them to everybody, and I mean, we got good feedback. We didn't get any referrals, which was the goal. A lot of people got them, which was good. But the cost of producing it that I learned, I was like, oh man, this cost a lot. It took a lot of time.
Right.
It was better. It was the money was better leveraged elsewhere.
Right.
Right.
So
I think,
the lesson. Yeah. I was going to say, what do you think the lesson there is for you?
The lesson was the stuff that's working, right? That's the stuff that you need to be putting all of your, all of your eggs in one basket.
Right. Double down on the things that are working for you.
That's it. Like, it cost me at the end of the day. And I don't think it's a bad strategy. I think it's a great strategy to send stuff in the mail that's helpful and value driven to the people in your practice. I think that's a great idea. However, for the $750 that cost me to produce and to send a month, if I add that to Facebook or Google, right?
Yeah,
exactly. But again, the win is you've tried something. You know that you can do it. You see the benefit, right? So now, when those things are maxed out, right, and somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, you should do our billboard." That's $8,000 a month. And I'll say, well, I can do this for $1,000 a month. And I know I'll get better returns on this one than that one.
So do you think, even going down that path was, a shiny penny? Like, hey, that's a good idea. I should do that. Versus, did you have a thought when you were thinking of, I should probably just put this money into Facebook and Google?
Well, again, I think it was around the time when I just started learning about Google. And actually, I knew what the numbers were going to be, but I didn't want to look at the Google numbers because I knew they were going to be better than I thought. And they were. So, it's hard to say. Like, the idea came from somebody in marketing that I really respect, that has given us great ideas and suggestions in the past. So like I said, I think the idea is good. And I think you're right. I think I can get still distracted from the shiny penny from time to time.
Another big one for me, and this was big, really big. This is probably the biggest one, actually. This one or the next one. This was probably it, though. It's just confronting staff and, not letting things slide, and, just seeing things that are off the target and being willing to have the conversation about it, and having that confrontational tolerance, as it's been called, to reorganize and rewrite the direction. And I think that in too many cases, I just assume people are logical. I assume people are hardworking. I assume people are on the same page. And of course, we have all of our onboarding and all the different things and their meetings. But again, I think what we've seen is that accountability is so powerful. There's generally a reason why somebody's not an entrepreneur. And so, they're not as self-motivated or as driven. Of course, when you do find that staff member, you hold on to them super tight and pay them well and, treat them, as well as you absolutely can in order to retain them, which is now what we have with a couple of our staff members. But letting things slide goes back kind of to the first one, getting too far away from the business. So I didn't see some of these things. And then when I saw them, I wanted to essentially have somebody else deal with it. So, delegate that to another staff member when really it's something that I should have dealt with and had the confrontation.
Yeah. So two things on this one. And I'm so fortunate that I have my wife in the business, because I have a tendency, right, to overreact to staff errors that don't need a reaction, right? Like, sometimes things happen in the business and it's just that conversation of like, oh my God, am I letting things slip? This is not, it just, my mind goes to there. So it's always nice, Jamie, to have someone to bounce ideas off of that, like, understands what the business is about. That's been really helpful. The other thing is your staff's never going to care as much as you do. Like, I remember some of the stuff that I asked my early CAs to do and then they wouldn't do it. And I get super pissed. And I was like, well, yeah, man, like, right now, my staff is doing whatever they want to do in their life and they're not worried about where the next new patient's coming from. So-and-so has a progress examination. Someone-so has to make a payment, like the stuff that we spend probably far too much time worrying about, but they don't care. Like, they're on to their life. So it's unrealistic to have them care as much about our business as we do. However, that's not to say, and I think this is a huge win for you because I know that you're not a confrontational person in the first place. So the fact that, like, you're willing and you were probably pissed off enough to be like, listen, this is how we're going to roll from now on is, it's awesome. That's a great step because those are great conversations to have. And it's actually really powerful, because I think a lot of people in chiropractic are actually handcuffed by not wanting to upset their staff, or
Sure.
what if they leave, or what if they do this? And that's just, again, going back to like what's coming back to be like the central theme of this podcast. Like, don't let anyone hold that leverage over your head.
Yeah.
Like, see ya. If you want to leave, bye.
Yeah, I think that's the lesson, right? Is you'll adapt, you'll survive, you'll figure it out. And we talked about this on, I think, last week's Life by Design for Chiropractors podcast with Mike about, how not to have your CA have leverage over you. So similar things there in that sense. Great show. Any more practice fails over the last 12 months for you?
It's, I think those are the main ones that I wrote down. The other ones are kind of more, corollaries of,
right.
of the same thing,
Okay. Well, let me share this last one with you, and we'll end on this note. And so for me, this is still a neutral. I think the jury's still out on this, and so I think it'd be interesting to talk about it on today's podcast. And then, in a year or two, we can come back and we can say, yep, that was a total mistake, or no, we totally made that succeed. So I think right now I'm still on the fence about whether opening Charlie's was a good idea or a bad idea in terms of whether it's going to be a win or a failure. And I'm not
wow,
afraid to.
Dude, that's a big.
Well, I'm not afraid to admit if something goes wrong and I fail. And again, I'm willing to fail. And I think there's a value there. Now, this would be a big failure in terms of, you're looking at a $70,000 to $80,000 startup cost. And, right now we lose, and I don't mind sharing numbers, but we lose probably, in the range of $3,000 to $5,000 a month. So you're looking at $40,000 to $50,000 on top of your startup costs of a loss. So that means every month, right? I mean, I think about it every month, one day a week in practice, I'm just working to keep Charlie's open, basically.
Right.
And, but again, the trade-off here, there's other trade-offs. The practice has grown, the gym has grown. So is it a lost leader where people come in, we're collecting more front end, customers, or is it just a customer acquisition cost? Right? Can I see it that way? Yep. So I have numbers in my head about what I think is, I'd love to be profitable. So don't get me wrong. I'd also love to break even. But I do have a kind of bottom line by the next 12 months. And I think that's the lesson here is, I do have a cutoff date and a cutoff number for myself. How long and how far am I going to go dumping $50,000 a year into a cafe? Right? I mean, at 10 years, you're talking about $500,000. And, if we're not recouping that somewhere, then, there's other places that could go. So I think the take home for me, big one is just because I had this vision for so long, it's trying not to fall. There's two sides. I mean, you have to fall in love with your vision, right? Because that's where the passion comes from. And that's where all right, I got to get up at 4:00 comes from. So falling in love with the vision, I think, is important. But if you're so in love that you're blind, then you're going to make decisions that, maybe aren't the best decisions in retrospect.
Yeah, I don't think that you're blind. I get it. I get it. It's hard, right? Like, I think marketers, we paint this dream, of like how these people found out about our office. But the truth of the matter is, it's hard to know. You're right, especially like if you're doing everything. Like, I know what you're doing because we talk about marketing and advertising all the time. You're the person that's everywhere in the community. So, it's easy if Charlie's is adding, $5,000 extra business somewhere else, that's a no-brainer, right? Then who cares?
Of course.
Who cares if you're losing $3,000 to $5,000 out of that specific thing? You're making it up somewhere else. So man, I get it, dude. I totally understand. I wish I had something smart to say, but I don't.
No, well, and I'll give credit to Mike. He asked the right questions when we first started this project. Mike was the only one. Smart dude. Well, he said to me, he said, so we did all this stuff and I was sharing all my vision about Charlie's, and he had one question. He said, okay, great. He goes, that sounds great. He goes, is there a market for it?
Yeah.
And I said, yeah. I go, yeah. He goes, how do you know? And of course, I'm like, oh, there's a Tim Hortons here and there's a coffee shop down the street. And, in retrospect, I think there is. I mean, I feel confident we're going to get there. And that's just part of, I think, being a positive person. I feel confident and the trends are there. It's just taking a long time. And so I think the market is there and there's lots of benefits. So I think we're going to end up on the plus side of this, but Mike was the first person who said, is there a market? And I think that's an important question, when you're just opening any business. The other challenge with this business, other than never having run a restaurant business, is the price points in terms of profit margins. They're super razor thin in restaurant, in the restaurant side. So, trying to create premium products so I can create premium pricing. And then of course, that has its own challenges with marketing, and
which is why every restaurant is owned by a Greek person who has 5 children and they all work there.
Right across the street, man. Right across the street.
And I'm not joking. Like
I'm not joking.
You save costs, right?
Hey,
I know, dude. You're in business. The biggest cost in business is
staff.
payroll.
Yeah, payroll.
Right,
No
is staffing payroll. Yeah, and that question, just to end that question. That's the Gary Halbert. So people who are listening, if they don't know Gary Halbert is like, the godfather of copywriters. Mm-hmm. And, one of the famous questions is he would ask, he'd do these seminars, which were like tens of thousands of dollars, and he'd show up with a hat that says "I hate clients" on it, and he'd book all these clients at the end. It's hilarious, classic, and it's amazing. And he'd be like, "Okay, you're in the restaurant business. What do you need to be successful?" Right? And people would put their hands. Oh, you need the best restaurant, you need the best location, you need the best food, you need the best staff, this and that. He's like, the answer is you need hungry people. You need the market. Right? Everything starts with the market.
Yeah. Absolutely. So lots of lessons, Chris, over the last 12 months. And guys, we wanted to share those with you. And I know that there's going to be value there. Maybe you've had some of these experiences yourself. Maybe you're going through them yourself. They're fresh. The salt is in the wound. And I know that if you take some of what we talked about today and apply that to your own circumstances, then that's going to guide you forward, help you get out of it faster and learn your own lessons. So as always, I'd love for you guys to leave comments, to share, and do all those great things that are going to help other people find Life by Design for Chiropractors, so they too can find out about how to make their practices better and start to have the life of their dreams. So guys, check out the show notes, Life by Design for Chiropractors /podcast. Should I have to say that? I guess I should. /podcast on today's episode. And as always, thank you for listening. Life by Design for Chiropractors, the voice of reason in chiropractic.